Something truly remarkable happened in Washington today. The United States Senate passed something by the way of a 96-0 vote. 96 in favor, 0 against. Which means Democrats and Republicans voted together for the same thing. And this incredible unanimous vote was not for one of those things that always passes no matter what. Things like renaming a post office or declaring Grandmother's Appreciation Day or a bill with the word patriot in the title. Although that last one did get one dissenting vote. Props to Russ Feingold. No, the Senate voted 96-0 today in favor of an audit of the Federal Reserve. So what exactly is an audit of the Federal Reserve, and how did it become the impetus for perhaps the single greatest act of bipartisanship since President Obama took office? Well, let's start with the Federal Reserve itself. The Fed is the nation's bank. Its job is to lend money to other banks. That's what it does, and that's what it has always done. But beginning in 2007, you might recall the economy went into an apocalyptic death spiral, and the system went haywire. And suddenly, the Fed wasn't just loaning money to commercial banks. It was loaning money to all sorts of parties it had never before lent money to, and doing it in all kinds of ways it had never done before. Most troubling of all, the Fed wouldn't say who any of those borrowers were and how much they got. And if the idea of the Fed just handing out cash and refusing to tell anyone who they were handing it to sounds crazy, that's because it is crazy. Here's what happened in March of last year when Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont huffed and puffed and tried to get federal chair Ben Bernanke to tell him who was on the receiving end of the $2.2 trillion with a T dollars in emergency Federal Reserve loans.
Will you tell us who got that money and what the terms are of those agreements?
We explain each of our programs. In terms of the terms, we explain the terms exactly. We explain what the collateral requirements are. We explain what.
To whom did you explain that?
It's on our website.
Yeah. Okay.
So all that information is available in our commercial paper program.
And who got the money?
Hundreds and hundreds of banks. Any bank or that has access to the U.S. Federal Reserve's discount.
Will you tell us who they are?
No.
Nope. You just catch that? He just plain wouldn't tell who the Fed is giving money to. Now, the effort to combat that secrecy and to account for the basic facts of who's getting how much money from the Fed, on what terms, has given rise to the ultimate strange bedfellows political coalition. The Audit the Fed alliance includes lefty bloggers like Jane Hansher and the uber-conservative right-wing anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist. It includes Congressman Alan Graceman, one of the most liberal members of the House, and Congressman Ron Paul, one of the most conservative. And now, remarkably, the Audit the Fed movement includes all of the 96 senators who are present today. Joining us now is Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, the sponsor of the Audit the Fed amendment that passed unanimously today. Senator Sanders, I hope you're not too fatigued from taking a victory lap. Thanks for coming here tonight.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
So first, tell me what exactly your amendment does. It is a little hard, I think, for folks to get their heads around this. What's the scope of this audit, and then what is it going to tell us?
Well, for a start, it forces Ben Bernanke to tell the American people what he refused to tell me on the day that I asked him those questions. And essentially, by December 1st, 2010, anybody in this country who has a computer will learn which financial institutions or foreign banks received loans, often zero interest, or very low interest loans from the Fed. So that's number one. There's going to be disclosure. Number two, what we put into this amendment is to ask the GAO to do an investigation of possible conflicts of interest between the Feds and the heads of the largest financial institutions in this country. It has always seemed very strange to me that you can have a situation where people like Lloyd Blankfein, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, could be involved in meetings with the Fed, fighting, for example, for a $185 billion bailout of AIG. And guess what, Chris? It turns out that Goldman Sachs got $13 billion repaid from AIG to Goldman Sachs, 100 cents on the dollar. Now, to my mind, that looks like a conflict of interest, but that's what the GAO will take a look at. You have situations where Stephen Friedman, who was a member of the board of Goldman Sachs, happened to be the head of the New York Fed. And in that capacity, he pushed for Goldman Sachs to become a bank holding company, gaining access to the Fed window. He also bought a lot of stocks which went up during that period. To my mind, again, I think to many people, that appears to be a conflict of interest. What is going on when you have the heads of multi-trillion-dollar financial institutions sitting down behind closed doors with the Fed and working out deals which benefit some of the most wealthy and powerful people in this country? Point is, the Fed is the most powerful, in my view, government agency. It has operated for decades with virtual, total secrecy. We're now beginning to lift the veil of that secrecy, learning what's going on, and I think that is an important step forward for the American people.
The biggest headline that comes out of today from the political perspective, I think, is about the unanimous vote. You know, how did this coalition come together at a time when practically nothing ever gets a bipartisan vote, let alone a unanimous one?
Chris, that's an excellent question, and let me tell you, this unanimous vote is a little misleading, because if you and I chatted 2 weeks ago, I would have told you I wasn't quite sure we would get the 50 or 60 votes that we needed. But I'll tell you, there's a lesson to be learned from this. And the lesson is that when you have strong grassroots progressive organizations like the AFL-CIO, SEIU, MoveOn.org, prepared to work with some of the strongest grassroots conservative organizations, and millions of people get mobilized and they say, you know what, we want to know what's going on in the Fed. It's our money, it's not their money. We want to know if there are conflicts of interest. When you have that type of grassroots effort, that energy percolates on up, and it makes it harder and harder for members of the Senate to say, you know what, no, I'm going to protect the secrecy of the Fed. That just didn't work today, and I'm very proud that so many people came together. And I think it's a lesson for the future. If we focus on economic issues, you're going to find a lot of working class people, whether they consider themselves progressive or conservative, prepared to come together to fight for justice in our country.
You know, there's also another reason, it seems, that the votes came in, which was that you had modified the language of the amendment from your original language. Largely, it was reported, I imagine, due to pressure from the White House and other folks in the administration. Are you satisfied with what you came out with? Are there things you want to see strengthened in committee when it goes to conference committee? Because the House has actually a kind of stronger version in some respects.
Well, yes and no. There are some aspects of the House bill which are stronger. For example, they have, unlike my amendment, which is a one-time audit of the Fed in terms of the emergency provisions passed since 2007, theirs is ongoing. And I support that. I support that. That was in my original amendment. On the other hand, what we have that the House amendment does not have is we have specificity. We have disclosure, which the House bill doesn't have. And also we have very clear language that the GAO is going to have to take a hard look at conflicts of interest. The House bill is a more general bill. Basically says, which is what my bill in the Senate said, the GAO will audit the Fed. But we have a lot more specificity in this bill, and I think that's a positive thing.
Great. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good to be with you.